There's absolutely no limit to what Michael Penix can be for the Falcons in 2025.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, everyone, to another illustrious episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And if you do not know me, I'm your very humble host, the Jolly Green Giant, a.k.a. Sirius Black, a.k.a. the iron that sharpens the iron, a.k.a. Mr. a.k.a. But, the government knows me as Aaron Freeman, the very humble host of this illustrious podcast. And I thank each and every one of you that is an everydayer of this podcast that makes this humble podcast your first listen each and every day. That means you check us out on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. That's all you got to do to become an everydayer. And today's episode, we will be joined by Mark Schofield of SB Nation. Mark is one of our go-to QB gurus and pre-draft evaluators of the quarterback position here on Locked On Falcons. We've had Mark a number of years in the past, but unfortunately we weren't able to have Mark on back in 2024 when the Falcons drafted Michael Penix. And so now we're going to, make up for lost time by having Mark on in 2025 to talk about what he believes Michael Penix could be. So without further ado, let's talk about Michael Penix with Mark Schofield of SB Nation right now. Welcome back, everyone. We are back with another illustrious guest. He is Mark Schofield, who covers all of the sports over at SB Nation. But we love to have Mark on to talk about quarterbacks. He has been a regular on Locked On Falcons over the years. I recall going all the way back to 2018, maybe even 2017, if my memory serves. But we had Mark on for several consecutive years, 2021, 2022, 2023, to talk about those quarterback classes and what the Falcons could potentially be getting if they targeted a quarterback in those draft classes. But unfortunately, when the Falcons did decide to pull the trigger on a first-round quarterback, we did not have Mark on the podcast back in 2024. But now we are finally in 2025 going to catch up with Mark Schofield, who will share his thoughts on the incredible upcoming season that Michael Penix is going to have. Or maybe Mark disagrees on that. But we'll get into all of that, guys. But Mark, my friend, welcome back to the show.
Aaron, it is fantastic to be back here. Yeah, we missed last year. I had some stuff going on the home front, which is frustrated because I would have loved to have come on and talk about Michael Penix. And I know we're going to get into all of that. But I think it would have been a fun and interesting conversation, and maybe we could sort of run through it here in a few minutes, because I was very, very high on Michael Penix as a prospect, and very confused by Michael Penix Jr. going to the Atlanta Falcons when he did in the draft. And so I think it would have made for a fun discussion in the moment, but we can revisit it with a little bit of hindsight here in a few minutes.
Yes. It seems like, and we'll ultimately at the end of this season, I think we'll be able to declare more, maybe a little bit more definitively if it works out for the Atlanta Falcons in the end. But hopefully we get a good result, although I think a lot of people questioned the process when it came to the decision to select Michael Penix. But when it came to that decision, what were some of the things, if we can revisit sort of your pre-draft thoughts of Michael Penix, what were some of the reasons why you were so high on Michael Penix going into that draft class?
Arm talent and aggression. I mean, I took some time this morning and revisited, all of his throws from last season, with Atlanta. And, he had a whole shot in that game against Carolina in week 18, early in that game. And I screamed. I literally screamed in my living room. Now, I was lucky because my son and my wife were out. My daughter's at dance camp right now, so I had the house to myself. It was just me and the two cats, and the two cats went nuts when I was screaming. They didn't know what was going on. But I screamed, Aaron, because it reminded me of a previous scream, which came back in November of 22 when he was still at Washington, and they were playing at Oregon. It was fourth quarter. It was late. They were down 7. And he made a ridiculous hole shot throw against cover 2 along the left sideline for a touchdown. And I lost my mind. I remember immediately, it was one of those moments where, you have these as well, right? Where something happens in sports and you open the laptop, you pull up StreamYard, you get in front of a microphone because you got to talk about it. You got to write about it. And that was how I felt in that throw back in 22 when he made that hole shot throw. And seeing that throw against Carolina, again, revisiting that this morning here on Tuesday morning, I had that moment where I was like, I can't wait to talk to Aaron about this throw. So yeah, I mean, when he was coming out of Washington, that arm talent, the aggression, the willingness to challenge some throw-in windows at different levels of the field, different areas of the field. I remember loving that about him coming out. Now, look, there were concerns, and there are still concerns, I think, with him going into now what will be his first full year as a starter, accuracy, mechanics, things like that. I think those can get cleaned up for the most part. And I think, this might be one of those moments where the stats and the film sometimes don't tell a complete, and parallel story. So I think there's some of that here at work with him. And I do think that, like, yes, mechanics are something to clean up, playing in the face of pressure in the pocket, something he'll have to improve upon. But I liked him a lot coming out. Now, when Atlanta drafted him, when they did, I was extremely confused. I think most people were confused, and maybe ultimately it was they had more information than we did on the outside. And that's one of the things that you and I have talked about. Gosh, almost 10 years now, right? About how the teams have more information than we do, and sometimes they get it right as a result of that. Sometimes they get it wrong as a result of that. But I think if we go down 2, 3, 4 years down the road and Michael Penix Jr. pans out for Atlanta and he goes on to have the type of career that people that are high on him hope and believe he can have, it may be a case of having that information panning out for the Atlanta Falcons. Whether it was what they saw with Cousins when they signed him, what they thought they were getting, the expectations and reservations they may have had, made them believe that, look, we got to hedge this, and we got to hedge this early with Michael Penix Jr. if he's available. And he was, and they turned in the card with his name on it. Now, if it goes the other way, then maybe people will just have more questions about the process. I think the player and the prospect were fascinated. I think people have questions and probably still have questions about the process. But look, we all know if it pans out and if he wins games and if he delivers some playoff wins and who knows, a Super Bowl, nobody's going to care about the process, right? It's like, you got it right. You win. That cures everything.
Absolutely. Yes. This is very much a results-based business when it comes to the National Football League. And you can do anything. I've used this countless example many times over the years where it's like everybody criticizes the New Orleans Saints for their business model when it comes to foregoing the salary cap, but they only do that now because they're not winning games. Meanwhile, the Philadelphia Eagles do the same thing and they're winning games and no one cares about that sort of thing. And so that's ultimately results are what matter. And hopefully the Falcons will get some of those positive results with Michael Penix. Now, Mark, I want to talk a little bit more about some of those issues that you had with him and whether or not those issues showed up in the 3 starts that he had at the end of the 2024 season and where you think those issues could get exacerbated heading into the 2025 season. And we'll do that as we continue today's Locked On Falcons. This episode is presented by Yahoo Fantasy with the NFL kickoff right around the corner. Fantasy football is back in full swing. And this year, Yahoo Fantasy is turning things up with a fantasy football experience like never before. And I'm playing on Yahoo Fantasy this year, and you should too, whether you're a first timer or a veteran making their millionth league. I've been a Yahoo Fantasy user for almost 2 decades, and the updates that they're rolling out this month are, pun intended, fantastic. To celebrate 28 years of fantasy football greatness, Yahoo Fantasy is dropping 28 big new features over 28 days throughout the month of August. And to kick it all off, they just dropped their Yahoo Fantasy Guillotine Leagues, a killer new way to play fantasy football on Yahoo, where the lowest scoring team gets eliminated each week until there's just one team left standing. With the season around the corner, now it's the time to get your league together and try this new mode. And if you're more into the classics, you can still play head-to-head private leagues or join a public league. So stay tuned for more killer announcements and start playing Yahoo Fantasy Football now at yahoofantasy.com/lockedonnfl. So I'm here joined by Mark Schofield of SB Nation talking all about Michael Penix. And Mark, you sort of mentioned some of the concerns you had with Michael Penix coming into the NFL and whether or not he would be able to overcome those potential issues. You mentioned the accuracy. You mentioned his ability to deal with maybe some pressure in the pocket. I know for me, I had similar concerns with Michael Penix, some of the mechanic issues, and the hope was when the Falcons drafted him with the original plan being he's going to sit behind Kirk Cousins for 2+ years, that he would be able to at least work on the mechanics things, and then ultimately we would see how the rest of those things would manifest on the field. Now, when he did finally get on the field at the end of the 2024 season, I thought one of the things that did not show up to the degree that I was concerned with in terms of a potential yellow or red flag was that ability to handle the pressure. I thought he did a good job being a little bit more of a creative quarterback in outside the pocket than I thought he consistently showed at Washington. I'm curious, were there any things that you saw in those 3 games that sort of confirmed your your pre-draft analysis of Michael Penix, and certain things that maybe he improved upon or got worse at or regressed on in those 3 starts?
Yeah, I think like you, Aaron, I was pleasantly surprised with some of what he was able to do on the move and outside of the pocket, whether it was on structured boot action type designs or they got him out on the move. I thought he handled those plays well. And, in my notes here, I'm old pen and paper, old school guy. I want to see more of that, going into 25. I'd like them to get him on the move by design a little bit more. Now, look, he's not a super athletic quarterback. Like nobody's going to confuse him with, say, a Lamar Jackson type of QB. But I think he handled those concepts well, and it gives that offense another element. And I think the more you can do, conceptually from a schematic standpoint of flow and misdirection and moving the quarterback around, that's going to help any offense. And I think Atlanta would stand to benefit from that. So I was very surprised, pleasantly surprised by some of those plays. There was a play he had against Carolina. It was a great moment, late first half, where he wants to throw an in cut on a dagger concept to Drake London. Underneath defender jumps it. He pulls it down, moves outside of the pocket, a little bit of creativity. They mirror him in the scramble drill London does, and it's a big play. I thought he had some moments like that where I call those sort of no throw decisions. He had one in his first start against the Giants where they dropped Kayvon backside defensive end under a hitch route. So he gets away from that. He ultimately throws it away, but it was a very nice creative move in the moment to do something outside of the structure of the play. So I was surprised in that realm. An area where I think he could clean up things are more of the interior pressure moments. And this almost feeds into the mechanical issues with him. And I'd say it's more an inconsistency than anything else. I know people have talked about his mechanics a lot. I think there are times when they're just inconsistent. There are some times where even from clean pockets, shorter throws, he won't even step into them. He'll just use complete arm and upper body rotation to get the ball there. I'd like to see the mechanics be more consistent. Sometimes when there's pressure at his face through the A gaps, that sort of trash at the feet moment, he won't finish throws. He won't step into throws, which again, you can understand given the injury history. You can understand a quarterback that has had some lower body injuries. You might not want to step into throws, and that's fine, but you've got to then finish them a different way. You've got to then finish them with more torque in the upper body. And so that's something he'll sort of have to learn and feel through. But with respect to, the creativity outside of the pocket and making plays off structure, I was, like I said, and like I think you said, pleasantly surprised with what he did last year. And I think that's a tremendous growth area for him in this offense, with more boot concepts, getting him out of the pocket a little bit, letting him throw on the move. I think he does a pretty good job of that and that could open up areas of the field and portions of the playbook that maybe the coaching staff wasn't expecting to have at their disposal with him. But now that they've seen it works, they can do more of that going forward.
Yeah, and that was a frequent criticism we had of this Falcons offense last year with the lack of play action. A lot of that was maybe due to limitations in Kirk Cousins, even despite his history of playing and being successful in play action heavy offenses. And we didn't see a dramatic shift in those final 3 games for the Falcons with a massive increase in play action. I think they ran it 13% of the time with Kirk Cousins, and then they ran it 14% of the time with Michael Penix. And that's been something that this coaching staff has harped on that they are trying to improve heading into the season. So I agree with you. I hoped that we're going to see a lot more of some of those concepts. But getting to the accuracy concerns, and that has been a frequent topic of conversation with Michael Penix, where there was a tendency, particularly in that Washington game late last year, where he missed some throws, sprayed some footballs. I'm curious, how big a concern is that going to be for you moving forward? I know one of the things that I've talked about on Locked On Falcons is, because of the arm talent, the aggressiveness all those things, and his willingness to push the ball down the field vertically, you might see a lot of defenses try to take that away with some of these too high shells and whatnot and try to force the Falcons to dink and dunk the ball. I think because of the Falcons' potential to be able to run the ball effectively at a high level, they can potentially exploit that in the run game. But one of those questions is, will you get this sort of consistent play from Michael Penix in terms of, throwing on the underneath and intermediate throws that you kind of need to basically exploit that way that defenses are going to play you? I'm curious, when you think about that, how big a concern is the accuracy? How big a concern do you think it is going to be?
Yeah, I mean, I think the concern about how defenses are going to play Atlanta is certainly valid. I mean, this is a quarterback that, did really well, I think, in the vertical passing game, on throws over 20 yards downfield and things like that. Now, he did miss some throws. You mentioned that Washington game. He had a throw in the end zone. The receiver was open on an out route and missed that. And I think mechanics did play a role there. He sort of big step with that right foot, swung the right shoulder. I mean, the right shoulder, wide open on that throw. There were some other throws in the vertical pass game as well, where he had opportunities. He had Bijan on a sluggo route, and they missed that one, not by much, but you missed it, and you'd like to have throws like that back. So I think, the mechanics and the inconsistency with the mechanics and the accuracy issues are something to monitor. Now, I also think there are moments where, drops, throws that went through receivers' hands, like a drop at the goal line that turns into an interception. I mean, that's where I sort of talked about earlier, where sometimes the film and the numbers don't quite match up. People sometimes, they point to a 53% completion percentage. That doesn't tell the full story. And I think some of those plays, when you start factoring those in, that completion percentage bumps up north of 60 and you get to like 66 adjusted completion percentage and things like that, where you can say, okay, well, now that you've really sort of given it the full context, is not as bad as the bottom line number looks. So I think that's part of it. Another thing, look, one of the things I really liked about seeing his film, revisiting it today, some of the things he did moving defenders underneath. I mean, moving those second level defenders with his eyes. He had a throw against Washington where, Bobby Wagner, one of the veteran linebackers in the game, he gets him to bite on the backside dig before throwing the out route to the number 3 receiver. I mean, when you're moving a veteran like Bobby Wagner with your eyes, like, you're doing a pretty good job as a rookie quarterback. Now, he's very good at getting those second level defenders to move, to create throwing lanes. And, if you're not pristine with your ball placement, well, that's okay if you've moved defenders and created space for throwing lanes with your eyes. And I think that's something to watch from him this year, because I think it's, again, that sort of growth area and opportunity for him in this passing game. Because if teams are going to play with these 2 deep looks and they're going to use quarters and they're going to force them to throw underneath, well, a couple of things. One, Bijan Robinson. Now, that creates opportunities for the run game. Like you said, 2, play action, right? Like something you hope to see more of. And I know you don't need to have a great running game to have success with play action, but it certainly helps. And if you're, playing with 2 high looks and you're showing play action, you're going to get people to creep down in the box naturally. So I think that's going to create opportunities. And then 3, the ability to open those throwing lanes with your eyes and to use a little bit of manipulation as a quarterback to create those opportunities. That's going to give you bigger windows to throw into. So then if you aren't perfect with your placement, it doesn't matter. And again, look, if he doesn't throw it to the right shoulder, the upfield shoulder, the right hip, like, okay, maybe you'd like to see that. But if you're still completing the throws, it's not that big of a concern, especially if you've created these big throwing lanes where, sometimes if you've got tighter coverage, you have to throw it to the right shoulder or to the better hip to create yardage after the catch. But if you've got a big throwing lane that you've created with your eyes, then if the receiver has to make an adjustment, that's okay, because they still have time to catch, to adjust, to catch, and then get yardage after the catch. And so I think that's another opportunity for him to grow this year. And another way that, if the accuracy isn't perfect, it's going to still be okay because of the things that you've done pre-snap, pre-throw as a quarterback to create opportunities for your receiver after the catch and at the catch point itself.
Absolutely. So it sounds like you are of the idea that the accuracy, while has been an issue at times, should not be a major issue that is going to hold Michael Penix back this upcoming season.
Sitting here right now, August 19th, I don't think so. because of, the ways we've sort of outlined it and the things that he does already as a young quarterback, and I think he can build upon going into next year. Now, look, the job of a quarterback is first and foremost to make the right read, the right throw, and give your receiver a chance to make a play. If, the accuracy starts holding this, or, inaccuracy starts holding this offense back a bit, and you start seeing opportunities where, 8-yard throws remain 8-yard plays because of inaccuracy and poor placement, then it starts to become a problem. Now, a parallel example, and it's a different issue, but you could see, I'll use this to sort of illustrate how it can hold an offense back. Mitchell Trubisky in Chicago. Now, his issue is being late with throws, and that would, if you've got a route concept where a receiver is open 8 yards downfield and an 8-yard throw remains an 8-yard gain because the throw is late, that's going to hold an offense back. If you're on time in rhythm, that 8-yard throw becomes a 15-yard gain because that receiver has room at the catch point. He can catch, make a defender miss, and now you've got yardage after the catch. In a similar vein, if the receiver has to adjust, slow up, hold himself back, adjust at the catch point, where suddenly where you had a throw in window and you had an opportunity for yardage after the catch, but that gets negated because of inaccuracy, again, that can hold an offense back. I think that Penix did enough last year with his eyes and moving defenders, and through all the schematic reasons we talked about with what we expect to see defenses do, those opportunities will be there for yardage after the catch. And, if a throw isn't pristine, it won't matter because there'll be the ability to create yardage after the catch because of what he's done pre-snap, pre-throw. But again, that's easy to say in August. It's another thing to see it on the field in September when the games start for real. My expectations are that it's something that this offense is going to be able to work through. This offense is still going to be able to produce in the passing game because of what Penix has shown already and the growth and development I expect to see from him this year. But again, we got to see it in action to make that case for sure.
Absolutely. So I want to continue talking about what we might see in action for Michael Penix in this 2025 season, and we'll do that with Mark Schofield to wrap up today's Locked On Falcons. So I'm sure some of you guys are looking to head on down to Truist Park to check out the Braves over the next couple of days before this season ends, but you're sitting here worried and looking at the weather reports and you're like, hey, it might rain out some of these games. I don't know if I'm going to be able to make it, but guess what? The perfect place to go for those last minute decisions to head on to the ballpark is Gametime, because they're the go-to place for those killer last minute deals. With all the money you save on tickets, you can now splurge on the food, drinks, and merch over at Truist Park. Gametime's making it all possible by making buying tickets fast and simple. Prices on the app actually drop the closer you get to first pitch, and so they have those incredible last minute deals, the clear panoramic seat views, and the lowest price guarantee that's taking all the worry out of buying. And if you're worried about the hassle of scrolling through thousands of options, I don't want to waste time, I just want to get to the ballpark, well, Gametime has their zone deals, which are going to pick the best seats in the section for you. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime by downloading the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL, and you'll get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. So, Mark, as you mentioned, I did think one of the things watching Michael Penix at Washington, and I think you saw, and as you so eloquently explained, you saw on display in those final three games, is you did see the quote unquote neck up ability when it came to getting to the right answers, being able to make the right decisions. It's just a couple of times in that Washington game, the ball just didn't get to the receiver in the ways that you want. And to me, like, I feel reasonably confident, cautiously optimistic, whatever word you want to put out there, that, you know, there will probably be a couple of games where, you know, that's issue is going to rear its ugly head. But I think for the majority of the games, he'll be just fine when it comes to the accuracy concerns. But as you said, ultimately that will be decided on the football field. But when we look ahead to this upcoming season, I think one of the things that makes me optimistic about Michael Penix is that sort of development that you kind of saw, that growth that you have seen with reps, because the mental load is not too much for this quarterback. And so as he gets to see things, one of the things we talked about a lot last year on Locked On Falcons was Washington played some Tampa too, and he wasn't consistently attacking those hole shots. And very early in that Carolina game, they come out, we're going to play Tampa too, and he's dicing them up with those whole shots. And that gives me the optimism that I have that even if Penix isn't necessarily going to hit the ground running immediately come September this upcoming season, as he gets more reps over the course of a season, all that to say, when you talk about quarterback development for young quarterbacks, how important is it? How often do you see in your eyes that sort of, we know development is not as linear as we like to pretend it to be, but how often do you sort of see that sort of, week to week, month to month progression for a young quarterback? And do you think that potentially applies for someone like Michael Penix?
Yeah, I certainly think that does apply. And like you said, the development process is not linear. I mean, if you were to sit here and ask me what would be a successful season for Michael Penix Jr., what would that look like? I wouldn't tell you a number of touchdowns or a TD to interception ratio or, a completion percentage. I would just tell you, look, when you get to December, is he a better quarterback than he was in September? Like, I think that's the sort of benchmark that you use. And it doesn't really matter how he gets there. There are going to be peaks. There are going to be valleys. There are going to be great games. There might be a stinker along the way. Those things happen for all quarterbacks, not just young developing quarterbacks. And I do think that, some of the throws that he made, some of the reads that he made give you a path to how this is going to go. And one of my favorite throws of his from those 3 starts at the end of the season was an incompletion. It was one of those too high looks from Washington where he threw the safety splitter and just put it in a perfect spot. Jeremy Chin just made a play on the ball, made a play on the body, really, and separated the receiver from the football. But it was an aggressive, layered throw over that middle of the field pull runner, the linebacker. We like to call the monument defender that's running away from you. You put it right over his head, put it in a perfect spot. It just went down as an incompletion. And that's, leads to that 53% completion percentage. People saying, well, he's not accurate. Well, you can't walk down 30 yards and hand it to the receiver in a better spot than he threw it. Those are the types of reads and throws that I think are going to be huge for him. And, I do think some of what he did against single high, I mean, he only saw, I think, 51 dropbacks against single high, 47 against, cover 2 looks, middle of the field open looks. But, he completed 29 of 50 passes against those looks, and he's made some good reads and throws along the boundary. I think the chemistry with Drake London is huge. I mean, can't tell you how many times in my notes I got another out route on time in rhythm to Drake London. I mean, those two, I think, have something special brewing, and that's certainly a connection to watch. So ultimately, I think there are a lot of things you can point to, whether you're an Atlanta fan or not, whether you're an analyst on the outside just watching this team last year and say, look, these are reasons 1, 2, and 3 why he could have a very successful year this year, and why when we get to December, we're going to answer that question in the affirmative. Yes, he's a much better quarterback than he was to start the year, whether it's the chemistry with Drake London, whether it's what he does from the neck up, whether it's his ability to move defenders underneath and create those throwing lanes, whether it's the fact that we might see some positive regression here in some of these drops, some of these freak plays that ended up as an incompletion or an interception, suddenly are completions, suddenly are touchdowns. In a year from now, we're talking about a quarterback that posted a 64% completion percentage, a 68, 71. And so I think you start stacking these potential reasons up for success, and you realize that there's a lot more that could really go right and break right for him in this offense than could break wrong for him in this offense. Yes, there are concerns, the inconsistent mechanics, playing against pressure, but I think with a full off season of he's our starting quarterback, this is what the offense is going to look like, this is what we're going to do with him, this is what the game script is going to look like, you're going to see a much improved offense, you're going to see a much improved quarterback, and I think Atlanta fans are hoping for a playoff football team. All of those things are possible next year.
Yeah. And I think one of the big selling points on Michael Penix, typically when you have these big armed, like to push the ball, aggressive quarterbacks, as you say, you get a certain level of volatility where, you're going to kind of live by the sword, die by the sword, where they're going to push the ball down the field. That, it might lead to a big explosive play, but it also might lead to an interception. That was kind of the rule for, Josh Allen's probably the most famous version of that sort of volatility. But I think, as you pointed out, a lot of times when Michael Penix is pushing the ball down the field, he's not really putting the ball in harm's way. He's not making the critical mistakes. As you pointed out, those interceptions are really more on the receiver, right? You look at all 3 of those interceptions, whether it's Kyle Pitts' drop, Ray McLeod's drop, Chris Blair arguably running the wrong route and against Washington and whatnot. And so I think you can get, a lot of the pros of having that aggressive big arm quarterback and none of the cons with that sort of thing. And that's what makes you excited about Michael Penix. What are your thoughts on that sort of lack of volatility that comes with Michael Penix that I think for me at least, is relatively rare in this league, because that's not usually the formula that you see with a young quarterback.
It is rare. And, it's interesting. There was discussion. We're doing this on Tuesday, and there's a discussion right now about Anthony Richardson. Daniel Jones was just named the starting quarterback in Indianapolis, and people are wondering about Anthony Richardson and his future. And my dear friend and colleague, JP Acosta, had this great point, which is everybody wants, 2020, 2021, 2022 Josh Allen as their quarterback, but they're not willing to live through 2018, 2019 Josh Allen to get there. There's sometimes that volatility. Atlanta may have skipped that step, which is huge, and again, Josh Allen, big arm quarterback, lots of aggression, likes to push the ball downfield. But those early seasons, there were a lot of mistakes. There were a lot of mistakes that he made. And really, these past couple of years, there are still lots of mistakes that he made. I mean, 2 seasons ago, led the league in turnovers, was among the league leader in turnovers with fumbles and interceptions. You have that volatility sometimes when you have that high risk, high reward type of quarterback. Penix largely avoided that. The 3 interceptions. Again, 2 of those through the receiver's hands. The Blair one, miscommunication a bit on the route. I think you look at some of the missed opportunities in the downfield passing game. They weren't mistakes. They were just throws that were either just out of the reach, or receiver turns the wrong way, or looks over the wrong shoulder. You can live with those types of misses. If he's wildly throwing things into the defender's arms or forcing throws all the time into double and triple coverage, that's one thing. But if you're just missing throws and the receiver's got a step, or if it just glances off somebody's fingertips, but they've got a step and it's the right read and the right throw, yeah, you'd like to have that play, but that most of the time you might connect on that one. Or even if you do half of the time, you've got an explosive play for your offense. And we're living in an era where, if defenses really are going to try to limit the damage and play with too deep or quarters and try to keep things in front of them, if you can create just 1 or 2 more explosive plays a week, 2 or more explosive plays a month, that's a difference between being 2-2 in the month of October and 3-1 in the month of October. That's sometimes all you need to do in today's NFL, is to create those explosive plays. And they were close last year. Maybe they missed on some that you'd like to have back, but I think going forward, they're going to hit on more than they're going to miss.
Yeah. So, Mark, are there any other thoughts that you have on Michael Penix or the Atlanta Falcons in general that you want to share before we duck out of here?
Look, I'm excited about the future of this team. And look, I think if people are saying, well, do you put your money where your mouth is? Ask me how many times I've drafted Drake London, in various fantasy teams this year. I mean, my son's 14 years old, about to start high school. He just had his, draft with his buddies, and he was asking me for advice going in. And I was like, get every bit. If you can get Drake London, do it. If you can get him in the first round, do it. And late in the round, late in the draft, he texts me. He's like, Darnell Mooney. I'm like, draft him. Like, just draft him. Because I think this offense has big time explosive play potential, and I think it's going to be fun to watch. I expect them to contend for this division. They might win this division. I think they're going to be a fun, fascinating football team to watch, and I think the arrow is trending up when it comes to Michael Penix Jr.
Absolutely. So, Mark, I appreciate you joining us in 2025. We couldn't get all these incredible takes in 2024 about Michael Penix, but better late than never. And
better late than never, right?
We'll see if Michael Penix and this Falcons offense live up to the hype and the expectations. Certainly, I think there's a lot of reason for optimism here in Atlanta, and we'll see if this team can actually deliver on that. Mark, let the people know, as we sit here in mid to late August, what are some of the things that you're working on over at SB Nation and elsewhere?
Well, Aaron, always a blast to catch up with you. Let's do it again soon. As for me, SBNation.com. We're working on our NFL preview, which will go up the week before the game start. We're going to have stuff on, probably going to have some stuff on Michael Penix Jr., a little bit of a spoiler alert there. We got some stories from everybody around the network getting ready for what we hope will be a fun and fascinating 2025 season. Also, I do have to plug we just redid our publishing platform over at SB Nation. And one of the things we're most excited about is what we call the feed, where it's basically like a little Reddit / short form live blog type thing we've got where anybody can contribute. So if you want to sign up, join us, especially on game days where we're expecting it to be a lot of fun on Sundays, people dropping in plays, people reacting to stuff in real time. So check out the improved new look, SBNation.com, as well as the feed. And hopefully I'll see some of you on there.
So, guys, that's going to do it for us here on today's episode. Thanks to Mark Schofield for joining us and giving his insights into Michael Penix. We'll probably be continuing this Michael Penix conversation with Matt Waldman from a conversation I had a couple of weeks ago about Michael Penix. Matt Waldman being another person that was a big fan of Michael Penix going into the 2024 draft and coming out of it. And we'll see where he's at with Michael Penix, now that we're a couple of weeks, about 2.5 weeks before the start of the regular season. So that will also be in store with you potentially tomorrow on the podcast, as well as anything else that's going on with the team as we get geared up for this preseason finale on Friday. So continue to make Locked On Falcons your first listen by subscribing or following for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you want to get ahead of the game in terms of your fantasy football league, Locked On Fantasy Football is going to have you geared up this season. It's all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.